Hola, Damien Jones podcast. Happy Monday. Another outstanding week to do some good work, to attack these issues. I want to welcome you to probably the best podcast that talks about news, politics, and life that you will ever enjoy. Come on in the room. We're going to have a great conversation today. Bring some folks in the room. We're going to have a great conversation today around database police reform. Database police reform. Come on in the room. Take this moment right now and go ahead and share this broadcast. We're going to hear from one of the leading voices in America on database, evidence-based policing reform. You've seen it on CNN. You've seen it on WGN. You've seen it all across America. We got to stop having these emotional conversations, and we got to get into the data. What do the numbers say on this issue? So welcome to the podcast, Damien Jones podcast. Take a moment and share. I'm going to take a moment right now and share with all your networks. Share this broadcast right now. I am so glad that you are with us today. Let me go ahead and share. Y'all get everybody in the room so we can talk about this issue. And so, let me also start by saying, in the great state of Texas, early voting started today. So visit mytexasvotes.com when you get an opportunity to find the nearest early voting location for you in the state of Texas. Okay. So let's make sure we are voting. Let's make sure we are voting people. Share the information with your friends and family and go and vote early. I think there are a lot of precautions around social distancing, staying clean, washing your hands, so forth and so on. And so take advantage of that. But go to mytexasvotes.com to find your early voting location. And so look at this quote, people. Look at this quote. I don't know who this is calling me right now, but I'll call you back. A great many people think that they are thinking when they are merely rearranging their prejudices. Okay. Many people think they are thinking when they are just rearranging their prejudices. And now the great thinker William James said that. And so what does that mean? A lot of times we think that we are pontificating. We think that we are a expert on a particular topic, but we haven't done the research. We haven't looked at the data. We don't know what the numbers say about it. We're just speaking from a whim. We're just in our emotions. And when we talk about police reform in this country, it is an emotional topic. It is a topic that gets you going. If you're somebody that has had a negative encounter with the police, then it is an emotional issue for you. And I understand the emotion. But at some point, we have to get past the emotion and the pontificating and the emotional attacks on one another, and let's attack the issue. Now, Dr. Thomas F. Friedman just passed a few days ago, and many of his debaters say, don't attack the person, attack the issue, right? And so we want to attack the issue today with this brilliant thinker, Dr. Howard Henderson. Going to bring him in the room in just a moment as I get my ticker and everything right. Damien Jones podcast. We talk about news, politics, and life. If this is your first time watching, give me a like right now. If you're a regular viewer, God bless you. Thank you so much. Give me a heart right now. I want to get into this conversation right now. Let me bring in our guest, Dr. Howard Henderson. I'm going to take it from this approach today. Doc, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Okay, I can hear you now. How are you, sir?
Appreciate it. I'm doing good, man. I'm glad you decided to give me a little time to talk about this issue, man. So I'm glad to be here, man.
Man, look, Doc, it is great to be with you. it is great that you could make time in your busy schedule. You've been all over the place, CNN, WGN, talking with outlets in Oakland. You have been really hitting this issue of police reform from a database standpoint, not emotional. And I think that's important what you do. So Dr. Henderson, for those that don't know, he comes to us. He's the director of the Texas Southern University Center for Justice Research, and particularly, which is the only Center for Justice Research on any HBCU in the country, which is profound. And I think we ought to applaud Doc for leading this type of work. But as we talk about this issue, Doc, I think there are a lot of questions we got to tackle today. Because men lie, women lie, but numbers don't, Doc. The numbers don't lie when it comes to this issue. And as I talked about earlier, we got to have conversations that are based in proven data, not opinion, and take our emotions out of it, and really dig into this issue. I was watching yesterday a conversation with one of your colleagues, Dr. Mark Lamont Hill and Candace Owens. And let me tell you something.
Okay.
I have real issues with the sister Candace Owens. But within that conversation, she said that Black men and women are being attacked by police because they initiate the confrontation. In which, I thought was ridiculous because the numbers don't support those type of things, right? And so the sister is articulate, she's bright, but we have to be careful on both sides, any side of the spectrum, to not just spew crap and not have data-based conversations. Folks, as we go into this conversation, put your questions below, put your comments below. I'm gonna put them on the screen, and Doc and I will attack them today. But Doc, let me start by you. Now you are on Mayor Sylvester Turner's task force that he put together, right? But at the same time, within your academic space, you created your own National Police Reform Advisory Group full of academics. Kind of talk to us about that advisory group and why you thought it was important to bring a deep group of academics together to attack this issue.
Man, first of all, I think that what has happened is the experiences of Black people over the last several hundred years with police has now been understood by the majority of the U.S. population, right? The research tells us that 70% of Americans now want police reform, criminal justice reform. And so, hey, we thank them for that because we have been saying that for as long as we can remember. What I recognized was that there's a lot of politics in this space, man.
Oh man.
And we can't risk politics diluting the reality that Black people are almost 3 times more likely to be killed by the police, man. And so what I did was I looked around the country and identified some of the best Black PhDs, JDs, several members of the community to sit down and to begin to look at some of these issues and some of these policies that are being proposed by legislators around the country. Because I knew that at some point politics was going to take over and nothing was going to get done, man. And so we are going to take a 3-pronged approach at this. And the first approach is to just take all of the noise and condense it down to a manner that is digestible by the average person.
Right.
Because that's who it's affecting.
Right.
Once we break this down and we begin to identify kind of what everybody's saying, then we're going to put that back out there in a more digestible manner and say, okay, here's what they're all are really saying. Once we get that feedback from the average person, then we're going to take that information and we're going to begin to digest it, criticize it, analyze it, and put it back out in a format that says, hey, listen, policymakers, here's what the community is saying about what y'all proposing. Because what I found very interesting is that the community, the people that are most affected by these policies, rarely, if ever, have a seat at this table. So we want to make sure that you know what I'm saying? And so we want to make sure that this time, instead of being on the menu, the community was able to decide what was going to be eaten by everybody. Okay. And so at the end of the day, man, we got to make sure that whatever policies are passed if it's not approved by the community, man, it shouldn't happen because they're the ones who are dealing with this day to day. They've been saying this from day to day. Man, they said over 25 million Americans have now protested in recognition of George Floyd and police misconduct.
Wow.
Man, that's huge, man.
25 million people. That's all colors, races, creed.
Man, as a matter of fact, they're saying more diverse than almost going back to the civil rights movement, man. We've never seen anything like this, man. I've been on the news, on different news outlets around the world, man, and they stand in solidarity. I was talking to a representative from Belgium, and I was like, man, y'all watching this? And the guy was like, man, we've been pushing for this a long time. It's global, man. It's global. And we hope that people understand that even though it's a global issue, there are local impacts, man, that we need to get everybody on board to try to fix it.
So let me say, people, listen. We just started the conversation. I asked him one question, and Doc has already knocked it out of the park. And so take a moment right now. Make sure you share this broadcast. Share it, because we are about to take off in a moment and really, really dig into this issue with one of the leading thinkers, if not the leading thinker in America, on this issue of police reform. We got to stop having these emotional conversations and really dig into the data. This man just said 25 million Americans were in the streets for George Floyd. No matter your socioeconomic status, no matter where you're from, no matter where you live, police brutality affects you in some type of way. Now, here's some of the questions we're gonna have to attack here today within our conversation, Doc. You know, we need to talk about whether police need a 4-year degree. Okay, don't answer that. Coming to it. Stay with me. We need to talk about how we attack the hiring process. Is it attacking the hiring process, or is it training mechanisms that we need to attack to achieve quality reform? Don't answer that. Stay with me.
Okay.
Does race of the police chief affect what the level of misconduct and brutality in a particular city and within a particular law enforcement agency? That's important. And so, folks, I think this is important. We need to be a thinking audience. We can be emotional, but we got to be a thinking audience and really dig into the data as we talk with Dr. Howard Henderson, director of the Center for Justice Research. And so, Doc, as you talked about that advisory group, quickly tell me what universities are represented on your advisory group.
Man, so we have University of Maryland, we have Rice, we have University of New Haven, we have Howard, we have Tennessee State, we have University of Memphis, and please excuse me if I'm forgetting anybody. And the list goes on, man.
Yeah.
And again, we can go down the list, but I think what's more important is that everybody that is a part of the group, they share lived experience, man. And everybody in the group is Black. Everybody in the group has prior criminal justice experience. We have one member of the group has been to prison. We made sure that we attacked every angle that we could, man. We got people who are active law enforcement on the group. We got people who are in the community who have a different perspective on the police. Man, we got to get this right because this doesn't happen every day. And so we don't have time for egos to be in the way. We don't have time for people to act like they know everything. We got to sit down and start this thing and ask questions of the community. Basically, what is it that you want? What is it that you need? And how do we make that happen? Because if we don't figure this out right now, man, it's going to be another 50 years before we get back here.
Yeah. So we kind of talked about Friday on this show, kind of about this task force, just briefly, and it just is just one part of the list of folks that are on that task force. And I looked down the list, and I was very encouraged when I saw your name.
Okay.
Because I said, if ain't nobody gonna really dig into it and really attack this issue the right way, I know Dr. Howard Henderson would do so. So Doc, you talked about that you will make this thing digestible for the community, and you said the right things already, that we're going to put the community at the table. We want to hear what they think, that through survey form and things of that nature, because a lot of folks aren't doing that. Let's go into what it will take, Doc, to achieve this reform? First, what does the data say about getting rid of qualified immunity?
So here's the deal, and this is a sticky situation, man. And
I got some folks say I need to ask Doc this question. They say they've heard your other
yeah.
interviews. They may not have
Oh,
liked
yeah,
the
no
answer.
doubt, no doubt.
So talk to me, Doc.
Yeah, no, man, and I appreciate the criticism because that's what we need, man. We don't have time to act like you can't be criticized.
Mm-hmm.
This qualified immunity piece is going to be a sticky one. Man, I've talked to conservatives this week, man. They're not hearing anything about getting rid of qualified immunity. I've also talked to folks on the extreme left, and they're saying, look, it's got to go. What I'm saying is to get this passed, to get some movement on this, you got to figure out where the middle ground is. And I think that it's going to take a long game approach at this, man, because you already see right now that the Republicans are not trying to pass anything the Democrats propose and vice versa. Mm-hmm. So we already stuck in a political argument. Yeah. And at the end of the day, more black people are going to die at the hands of police.
Which I think is ridiculous on any side, because lives are being lost and we don't have time for partisan games. This is not a partisan issue. This is a human rights issue. This is a public health issue, right?
Right. And so, you know, my position to both the left and the right is to say, okay, look, I know y'all totally disagree about the approach on this thing. How can y'all figure out how to get over your disagreements and fix this issue? And what I'm saying is, let's identify the police behaviors that should not be protected by qualified immunity. Let's list those out, right? Mm-hmm. And we can name out what types of activities should not be protected. Let's start there, okay? I think if you start there, then you'll be able to get more leeway with the folks who don't want to get rid of it at all right? I understand that because this is a highly emotional issue, but we got to be strategic in this, because the longer we play around with it, the more opportunity we allow people who utilize it as a scapegoat to continue to get away with misconduct. So it's a strategic position for me, but we got to be strategic about it and make sure that everyone understands. Go ahead.
So if I understand what you're saying is, and let me say, as an academic, you don't have, not particularly that you don't have a dog in the fight, but you don't get involved in the politics. You just want to inform and educate.
Man, listen, here's the deal. Academics are hijacked all the time for political reasons. You know, I try my best to stay out of it as much as I can. And the way it works is, no matter what research we put out, both sides are going to take it to use to their advantage. And so we just try to tell it like it is, man. Here's the reality. African Americans are 3 times as likely to be killed by the police than other groups. That's a fact, okay? Mm-hmm. So my goal is, how do we figure out how to stop that from happening, okay? So if I could figure out how to use the removal of qualified immunity to keep George Floyd from happening, then I'll start right there, right? We still trying to figure out what they're going to do with Breonna Taylor's situation. We got to deal with the issues at hand and stay out of the politics and deal with this, man. Do it the way it's supposed to be done.
So with qualified immunity, you're saying that one side wants to get rid of it, the other side that we ain't gonna budge on it. You're saying let's come to the middle and let's start identifying specifically what we can accept, what we cannot accept. If that's playing with words, you know, I'm looking at one comment that says that maybe we need to change it from what reasonable force to necessary force. Is that something that you think maybe should be entered into the conversation?
I think so, man. Here's the thing.
Reasonable force, necessary force.
Yeah, I think we got to quit playing with vague terms. I think we got to be concrete about the activities that we're talking about. Don't give anybody any leeway. In other words, a knee to the neck does not get protected by qualified. I mean, you name out the behaviors that don't qualify, because as long as you give people vague opportunities like a probable cause, they're going to find a way to manipulate that operationalization to accept the behavior that they want to put out there. We got to get away from that. This is 2020. Mm-hmm. We can all sit down and list out police activity that should not be protected. Let's do that. Let's stop playing games with wordplay and call it what it is.
Right. So, okay. So you talked about what we need to do with qualified immunity. Let's attack this other issue, in which this is something that I've been screaming from the hilltops for years now, because it just makes sense to me. And I've talked to some legislators about this, and they said to me, they said they don't feel it will go anywhere. And I always say, God willing, if I'm ever elected to the state legislature, one of the first bills I will pass or put forward is related to this particular issue. Let's talk about the level of education for law enforcement officers. Doc, I see you chuckling here, man, but this is serious, man. You know, many of the law enforcement officers that we're dealing with and I'm this what I'm finna say is not fact based. I'm just finna speak on a whim for a minute here. But a lot of these police officers get a badge. They're bullied through high school. They aren't the popular guy. They don't get the popular girl. They are teased and so forth. And then they get that badge and they get power and they go and they kind of take vendettas out on folks and so forth and so on. And oftentimes they don't have a higher level of education. They don't have degrees, high school diplomas, sometimes maybe a 2-year degree, right? Now, if we're talking about a cosmetologist needs 1,500 hours to do hair and cut hair and so forth, and other trades have long hours and long training requirements to do their job. But police officers is a couple hundred hours, right? Just to get a badge and to get a gun and to have the power of life and death in your hands, the power of putting somebody away for many years, right? But we require doctors to go to school for 6 to 8 years, lawyers 3 years, so forth and so on. But for those that have life and death in their hands, no education whatsoever. So I submit that all law enforcement officers need a 4-year degree. Doc, tell me what the numbers say as it relates to that.
Okay, so I worked for a number of years as a probation officer, and one of the criteria was a college degree
for a probation officer.
For a probation officer, and I work with parole officers, which required a college degree. I work with judges who obviously required at least a bachelor's degree. In most places, they're required to have a law degree. In most urban communities and in most rural communities, they have law degrees as well, which means the person has about 6 years worth of education to be a judge. And I was always perplexed because a police officer has as much power as a judge, but yet doesn't require as much education. A police officer has the ability to judge you, convict you, and assassinate you in a matter of minutes, as we saw in the George Floyd situation. But society has said it's okay for us to recognize that only 20% of police officers have college degrees around the country as an average. The research says only 20%, and that's mostly in your major urban police departments, 20%. And again, that's a national average. You're going to have some departments that may be more than that. A lot of it we found is premised on whether or not the chief has a degree. Mm-hmm. If the chief has a degree, then oftentimes they expect their officers to have a degree below them. But the research has been very clear about this. Mm-hmm. If a person has a college degree as a police officer, they are 40% less likely to be involved in use of force cases.
Stop. Plain and simple. Stop.
So I'm on.
Hold on. Stop.
Go ahead.
Stop. Let's rewind that. I want people to, because we got to be a thinking audience. We got to be a thinking group of people here and understand the data. So you said 40% of officers with 4-year degrees. What now?
You have 20% of officers who have college degrees.
Okay.
If an officer has a college degree,
okay,
they are 40% less likely to be involved in use of force. Wow. Now, think about this for a second, man. And this is a fact that people need to understand very clearly. College is important when you are charged with interpreting the Constitution, right? And you have the ability to control human behavior by your mere presence. What does college do for a person, right? And what it does is it opens you up to differences, right? You and all of us who went to college understand that it was a phenomenal experience that I wish more African Americans had an opportunity to experience. because it forces you immediately to deal with people who aren't like you. And it takes you out of a homogeneous or plain and simple environment where everybody doesn't think and do the same thing. And so if an officer has been to a college or a university, that individual has worked with diverse groups of people, which they would do in the job. Man, we surveyed college students and we asked them what their experiences were, what they thought about minorities, blah, blah, blah. And what we found is that in college, white male students still possess this level of bias toward minorities.
Even in college.
Even in college, but here's the thing though. It's okay to have bias. Everybody has
we
bias.
all do. We all have a bias.
What's not okay is when you don't understand that you can't act on their bias in your day-to-day duties. Right? And so what I think college does to people is it teaches you how to maintain your bias in a civilized society. Right? All of us come from homes where there is some bias towards something or another. But we learn how to navigate that space and be as fair as we can. Now, go ahead. You had a point you were going to start.
No. I just want to unpack that a little bit because you talked about how college introduces you to engage with other people, engage other ethnicities, engage with other folks from different cultures, and you have a bit, not that you embrace it, but at least you have a better understanding of those type of cultures and so forth and so on. And so I think that's profound with what you just said, because if officers were entered into a classroom for 4 years and on a college like a Texas Southern University where you and I met, you meet so many different people from so many different walks of life. When you are in group projects, you have to deal and work with people that you may not have worked with before, and it helps you understand. But I also think it helps with logical reasoning that doesn't start with excessive force. It helps you understand Jamal on the block, or Letitia from this side of town, and the things that they go through. Because if your education was high quality, then you would understand the socioeconomic issues that people of color, Black people, brown people deal with. Correct?
No, I think you're right. And listen, the reality is a lot of police officers don't live in the community that they police.
That's a whole nother conversation.
And so if you look at the criminal justice system in terms of major decision makers, you have police, you have court personnel, you have probation parole officers, and you have correctional officers on the other end. The police oftentimes are that first point of contact. And it seems unreasonable to me that you would not require a college degree for people who have one of the greatest levels of discretion in the entire system. Okay. Now, there are some exceptions to the rule, and I'm not saying that because you don't go to college that you're not a reasonable person who is able to make decisions.
Right.
What I'm saying is everybody else in the system, besides correctional officers, has to have a college degree. And so it seems counterintuitive that you would understand the reason why a police officer would need a college degree. But again, when I talk to folks who have drunk the Kool-Aid, let me say, they say, well, we cannot afford to pay police officers who have college degrees. And my counter to them is, have you seen the cost of hiring officers who don't have college degrees? And have you seen the impact of police misconduct? Do you understand who pays for police misconduct? All of these things we need to begin to unpack.
And we're gonna get there. We're gonna get there too.
And we need to get there because we have been conditioned to see police officers as infallible. From day one, we see them unable to do any wrong, and then we age and we recognize that just like any human being, they can be problematic as well. Now, I've gotten tons of emails over my academic career. Most recently, 2 days ago, a police officer emailed me and he said, listen, I heard you talk about college degrees and people needing those. And he said, man, you're absolutely right. Officers know this, but there's a culture here that does not want to upset the apple cart. But we're going to have to demand college degrees. And so I responded to him and I said, listen, think about this. The U.S. Marshals, the FBI, the ATF, Secret Service, I have former students who teach at every level of law enforcement. And what I can tell you is this. The most difficult level of law enforcement is the local police officer. If anybody needs, because of the diversity of the population that they deal with, okay? You don't know what's coming your way. I need you to be able to deal with someone. I need you to be able to recognize someone has mental illness and not shoot them. There's different logic, and the research shows us that if an officer has a college degree, they deal better with problems.
Yeah.
Right? A lot of this, man, is a reflection of the broader culture. And that's the piece that I think we oftentimes overlook, is that the police are simply the expression of society and the value that they place on people. We have to understand the role the police play in this entire power structure. And we can talk about that from here to next week, but we cannot get lost in the fact that the police are expressing a certain mentality and a perception of groups in society.
Yeah. The Damien Jones podcast, talking with the leading voice, the leading academic voice, one of those, on the issue of police reform, having a database police reform conversation with the great Dr. Howard Henderson, director of the Center for Justice Research at Texas Southern University. Folks, take a moment and share this broadcast. If you like the information you heard so far, give me a like right now and share this broadcast as well, and tell others. And when you talk to your legislators, when you talk to your city council persons and those in your area, let them know. The numbers say that law enforcement needs a college degree. This is not just some whim. This is based on research. If you have a college degree as a law enforcement officer, you are 40% less likely to deal in misconduct, simply because you have deeper logical reasoning skills. Let me take a moment right now to pause for station identification really quickly. Here we are. Hey, folks, thanks to our friends at IamSorryIamSick.com. Do you want people to stay away from you when you are sick? Have you tried to self-isolate among COVID-19 and people just want to keep coming around you? Well, I have the perfect solution. SorryIamSick.com has great gear, great apparel that will allow you to self-isolate in style. Make sure you visit our friends at SorryIamSick.com to get great apparel. And thank them so much for sponsoring today's conversation around police reform with our dear friend, Dr. Howard Henderson. God, this is great, Doc. This is great. Now listen, let's attack this other piece of it. Let's talk, Doc, about diversity of the chief. You mentioned it earlier about kind of the color of the chief, and you and I were reading over the weekend some information as it relates to when a chief is black or brown, the effect that it has on the troops, and that it also leads to less misconduct. Kind of talk to us about what the numbers say around if your chief is a chief of color.
Well, the research in hot off the press, man, just came out
off the press
last week, man, and it's great. The researcher took all of the national data on use of force and looked at who the chiefs were in these departments. And they concluded that if your police chief is black, then you're 70% less likely to have use of force complaints in that police department. Now, again, that's initial findings, and I think there's a little more work to do there, but I think it's an interesting piece. I think, I don't like to look at the world in black and white. I think there are the degrees in which people differ. But I think there's something there to have a conversation about. Here's the reality, man.
Yeah.
A white person with a criminal record has a greater likelihood of getting a call back for a job than a black person with a criminal record. We have a society that uses your skin color as a badge of dishonor, right? And so society has been taught that black people are criminal and that at all costs we are to be controlled by any means necessary. Now, again, that's not everybody. There are exceptions to the rule. I have a lot of good non-black friends around the country, and we communicate on a regular basis. But my question to them in all cases is, when you see disparities, do you say or do anything about it? And I think that's what society is saying now, that 70% who are now expressing their discontent with what's going on in American policing. They're saying, look, I see now that what black people have been saying for hundreds of years is true. You guys must do something about it. And so we got a Supreme Court that's been silent on the issue at this point, right? They've had opportunity over the last couple of weeks to take some of these use of force cases. Maybe they're waiting on the right case to take. I don't know what that means, but I think that at the end of the day, we have to begin to express our culture, our reality, so that people understand that black people are not criminal by nature, that we are normal like anybody else. And here's our moment. And that's why I decided to put this group together to say, man, listen, we need to look at this through a culturally sensitive, responsive lens, because if we don't, it's going to get hijacked by other groups, which typically happens to our issues.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm seeing the comments. Folks, keep the comments coming. People are saying this is fire, Doc, what you are dropping on us today, because we've been having all these emotional conversations and nobody's been interjecting some real data into the conversation. So I appreciate you for blessing this audience to be a thinking audience as we have conversations around our dinner tables, at the barbershops, at the parks, at the voting booths, and so forth around this polarizing issue. Now, folks always talk about, Doc, the training piece. We need to train better. Officers need to get trained better. Are they being trained to put a knee on the neck? Are they being trained to aggressively approach African Americans in such a way? I'm seeing videos of officers corralling and arresting and handcuffing 10, 12, 8-year-old young boys and girls and things of that nature. So the question has been around training. But I've also heard you mention that training needs some reform, but you said let's start at the beginning and look at who we hire and the qualifications of hiring people on the front end before we bring them in, because we can catch some things on the front end before they even get into the force. Can you talk about that and tell us what the data says about that?
Man, listen, this is a four-legged race, man. And in terms of reforming the police, one, we got to deal with hiring practices. We got to deal with training. We got to deal with leadership. We got to deal with organizational culture. And encapsulating all of that, we got to improve transparency and accountability. Let me go back to the hiring piece.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to look at training like training is the issue. Training is not the issue. Minneapolis had one of the best trained police departments in the country. Okay, the training issue is second to who we hire. When you look at these individuals who are caught in these police misconduct cases, isn't it interesting how when they finally get caught and it makes national news, they have 5, 10, 15 prior complaints against them?
Yes.
That's the issue that they know on the front end. And when you talk to police psychologists, and that's, you got to have a show with police psychologists and the HR directors of police departments, because they understand that during the hiring process, they see all of this. They see police officer applicants who should never be hired. Okay. They see people who aren't passing the psychological evaluation, and or the psychological evaluation is not adequate to identify the authoritarian personality types that should not be in policing. If we don't do it in hiring, it's difficult to fire someone once they get in the civil service. If we bring up police unions in this piece, we could talk to next week, but I think the hiring piece is the piece that we need to turn our focus to.
Well, you just made a great point, because the unions are so strong, but if we catch them before they become a part of the unionized system, then we could minimize a lot of this misconduct. You talked about those authoritarian behaviors and mindsets. Kind of unpack that a little bit.
Man, look, when you look at a negative interaction between the police and the community, you typically see it when the police officer feels like he or she's been disrespected.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Now, you have all types of folks who go around the country trying to teach kids and adults how to act when they encounter the police, right? That's the same kind of thought process that we had on the plantation when we were trying to teach our kids how to deal with the master and the overseer.
Right.
Now, again, they can say, hey, we're trying to save lives. That's true. That's fine. But you can try to save lives at the same time. You got to figure out how to identify police officers who should not be on the police force. It's very interesting that when it comes time to fire people that they want to fire, they get rid of them pretty quick. No problem. You're going out the door. But it's something about that personality type that is more likely to harm or be involved in misconduct. They seem to be protected by the bureaucracy of American policing. And I think that is the piece that we need to get to, is understanding how we do that.
So let's look at one of the more the latest, more popular, I don't say popular, but more known shootings that we just saw in Atlanta, Rayshard Brooks. Okay, and once we learned a lot of the details of what happened on the scene, once the DA kind of uncovered, he mentioned that once the officer shot him in the back and killed him, his first words was that excited utterance, and he said, "I got him." Right. Later, after he said that, they went and kicked him in the back 2 or 3 times. Well, the other officer stood on the body, particularly. But overall, the conversation I've heard is that people felt, and I talked to an officer who told me this, because Mr. Brooks handled them within the scuffle, and they didn't get the best of him, their ego was a little bruised. Right. And they felt some type of way because this guy got the best. Here they are with all the equipment, the guns, the badge, the taser, all of this, the letter of the law behind them, and they still got handled physically by this black young man. And they wanted to take that out and end his life and settle the score. Does that kind of play into that mindset you just talked about?
Man, listen, at some point, we're going to have a conversation about how we need to identify police officers who understand how to put their ego to the side when they're dealing with people.
Mm-hmm.
In the Dred Scott case, you had Justice Taney say that a black man has no rights to which a white man is bound to respect. And what you're seeing here is the total disrespect of black people as citizens in this country. Now, we could talk about this in the areas of medicine. I mean, we can go on and on in terms of where black people are disrespected. But the policing, you see it. My grandfather was a police officer, man. One of the first police officers where I'm from, one of the first to make detective in Tennessee, right? And he said, man, when he first started out, if you were not of superior physical stature, you were not allowed to be a police officer, particularly coming from working in minority communities. I think we have a physical problem in terms of expectation of officers being able to handle themselves in the line of duty. You're going to, by the nature of your job, have individuals who don't believe in you, don't respect you. It's okay to be disrespected, right? It's interesting how we accept the disrespect and the response to disrespect on one hand. On the other hand, we say, well, you got to learn to deal with it. Sticks and stones may break your bones, but words never will. But the police have been constitutionally allowed and judicially accepted to do that, right?
To disrespect persons of color, yeah.
And we got to stop that, man. And the other piece is that, there are white people who are killed by the police, right?
Absolutely.
Black people are just more likely to be killed by the police. It's interesting how you never hear about that, okay? Because there's something deep seated in this. It's almost like a hunting expedition. We see it on TV every other day. Nothing is being done about it. And we have policymakers who are saying we're caught up in the politics. And give me a moment if I can express this.
Please.
You saw the Democrats put out their proposed bill, okay? And then a week later, you saw the Republicans put out their proposed bill. Right? In between that time, you saw Donald Trump put out his executive order.
Okay.
What was so difficult about all of them sitting down at the table and saying, let's identify the best pieces that we can all come together with and save American lives? Quit playing games when it's not you that's suffering. It's okay to step away from your partisan position to save lives. Until we do that, man, we're going to be in trouble.
Well, you know what? It's interesting that you bring that up because, one, as you mentioned, politicians are playing games. They all are going to get in their echo chamber with their groups, and they're going to say, we're doing all we can. Democrats going to say it on their side. Republicans are going to say it on their side. I think it's all hogwash, right? At the end of the day, saving Black lives is not a partisan issue, right? Listen, I'll even go. I just read this article last night about Van Jones, about a Daily Beast, and they said that Van was an architect of the First Step Act, and he also helped President Trump put together this executive order. Now, folks, Democrats are attacking him. How can you work with the president on this issue? He's bought and sold, so forth and so on, right? And I hear that argument, but I also see it from maybe Van's standpoint of, man, I just want to get stuff, the can down the road. I just want to see progress. I just want to get people out of prison. I just want to see reform. So what does it matter at the end of the day? Why can't we put our differences aside to save lives, Doc?
Because what we're seeing is one of the last gasps of white supremacy. The police were created in that junction when you had a gap between the haves and the have-nots. When you look at a city layout map-wise, you'll see an overabundance of police in certain neighborhoods as opposed to others. It clearly shows you that there is a function to American police that we no longer even think about. Until we disentangle that function and we redefine what police are, that's why this defund police conversation is a very interesting and fascinating conversation. Because if it does nothing but force people to think about the allocation of resources, we've done our job. For the first time in my lifetime, and I think in the history of this country, Black people's position and perspective is being respected. The challenge is, you look, private corporations have pledged over $1.7 billion to help fix this problem. Right. Now, we can argue about why they did that. That's irrelevant. Let's deal with the fact that individuals now recognize that something needs to be done about this because we can no longer allow this to happen. We saw George Floyd, man, die in less than 10 minutes, unnecessarily.
8 minutes, 46 seconds.
Breonna Taylor, they still
haven't figured it out. I don't know. I don't know what's going on with that daggum DA in Kentucky, man.
We got to figure out, and I think we need people who have common sense solutions, who deal with everyday people to address some of these issues. And I think that's what we try to do because we follow at the Center for Justice Research, man. We follow what I call a translational research model, man, and we spend time talking to folks in the community, talking to policymakers, talking to decision makers, and that takes us time. Yeah. But man, you can't do research if you're not talking to the people that you're researching. They're not lab rats, man. And I think they have a vested interest. It's sort of like I've never understood why a judge will go into a drug court and make decisions and don't have a junkie advisor. It doesn't make any sense. You have to have someone who has lived the experience to help you find a solution, man.
Yes, sir.
And that's where we are, man. But we seem to be running short on people who understand reality of life.
let's go here, and I also saw some research. Damien Jones podcast having a database police reform conversation with one of the leading voices in America, who's not in his ivory tower, who is touching everyday people, who is surveying everyday people on how we fix this issue. Dr. Howard Henderson, director of the Center for Justice Research at Texas Southern University, and for many of us know, all roads lead to Texas Southern University. There is no dispute on that. There's no data that's going to dispute that on this show. But Doc, uh, when you see these brutality cases, I'm sure there's going to be a settlement by the city of Atlanta when it comes to Rayshard Brooks. I'm sure there's going to be a huge settlement when it comes to the city of Minneapolis with George Floyd. We've seen other settlements. Chicago is one of the leading cities with settlements to families. New York is astronomical with the settlements. LA, so forth and so on. I'm sure Houston has its blunders as well. When you look at the data, I saw a report that said that corporate America, in all that they are saying Black Lives Matter, they benefit from police brutality in a financial way. Kind of walk us through that and unpack that, please, Doc.
Man, so here's the sticky piece that we don't understand. Cities around the country spend millions of dollars on lawsuits over police violence and killing. Now, what has happened is those lawsuits are essentially financed through the issuance of bonds to cities in some cases. And either way that it's financed, those are paid for through tax. Okay. Essentially, what's happening is that cities are using their residents to mortgage police violence. This issue is so deep, man, because everywhere we turn, we essentially are helping financially support the continued misconduct of police officers. Man, it's very easy to fix this problem. We just got to get people who understand the issues to sit at the table and to remove politics away from it and deal with it.
So essentially, so when these brutality cases, if we don't attack this issue, right? We're talking about defunding the police, which is an argument that I don't support, I don't agree with. I believe in reallocation of these dollars. But when these brutality cases happen and officers are at fault, then these millions of dollars are paid to the family, and rightfully so. But this is coming from tax dollars, so we are paying for the brutality. Not correct?
Yes, we are indirectly, right? And so the challenge here, man, is to educate people on the flaw of the system, and that is essentially we're financing our own demise, man. And so I try to educate my students, man, and I have been in this space researching criminal justice since 1995, man. So when I wrote my thesis, I looked at mandatory minimum drug sentencing back in the day. And one of the things I did, I said, if we could figure out how not to continue to ritualistically sacrifice everyday people across the altar of justice, we will be in a better place, man. Because at the end of the day, this is directly impacting the folks at the bottom of the spectrum. We got to figure out how to move this forward, man, and hold people and hold everybody accountable, because we can't make it any other way.
No. Talk to me now. You were just on a national platform, and I know that's why I'm so thankful that you came and sat down with little old me, to kind of talk about this issue. But you were just on CNN discussing this very issue. What were some of the things that you laid out to the national viewership of CNN on this issue?
Well, first of all, man, I'm humbled that you feel that way, man. But 80% of criminal justice is local, man. And no matter what happens at the national level, folks are being hammered in local cities and communities around the country. So your show, though it may not be a national show and people may not watch it all over the world, you're doing the job and you're helping transform at least Houston, if not Texas, and hopefully people can replicate your model around the country. But man, here's what I laid out to the national audience. Number one is that the education piece, and you've already talked about that. We can't sweep that under the rug, because I think that will address a lot of the problems that we see in policing. Now, do we have some people who have degrees who have issues of racism? Yeah, they do. But the research tells us that they're 40% less likely to be involved in use of force cases. But the other piece that we got to deal with is this leadership piece.
Mm-hmm.
We got to stop accepting police leaders who say they didn't know that their police force was acting in this manner. I'll give you an example. We saw the police chief in Minneapolis come out and fire the officers who killed George Floyd.
Okay.
But in the same sentence, he said the one officer had 16, 17 prior.
I think it was 18.
But how can you say that and you not be held accountable for having that officer on your force? I think that not only do we need to have this national database that keeps track of this, but I think that every police complaint should be evaluated by an external review board with subpoena power. As long as
don't say that.
Exactly.
Don't say that in Houston.
But here's the thing though. As long as police departments are allowed to use internal auditors, internal affairs as they call it, then you don't really know, and we can assume that the assessment and review is not objective. What I'm saying is you need to have an external body review these. It's sort of like if you and your family, everybody's got drama in their family.
Yeah.
If they told you to come in, exactly, yeah, you're the exception. If they told you, if they told you to, evaluate yourself and your family,
okay,
you're not going to hold everybody in their family accountable. That's just the way. That's human nature. We got to get away from the fact that the police are the end of the line. Everybody needs somebody to hold them accountable. And I think this is the opportunity to do that.
So let me say this. So on Friday, on the show we did Friday, I just really did a really educational show. And the City of Houston Public Safety Committee held a committee meeting on last Thursday, I believe, Wednesday or Thursday. And 200 public speakers, presentations by the DA's office, and so forth, by the HPD, and also by the current Independent Police Officer Oversight Board. And council members asked tough questions. And what we found out is that the current Oversight Board is housed inside of HPD. HPD chiefs sit on the review board. They provide these citizens with the information that they deem, or the cases that they deem needs to be reviewed. The guy, they don't know if they have meeting minutes. He couldn't answer basic questions. They said they only review about 40 body cameras per year. Out of thousands of officers, you're only reviewing 40 body cameras, right? And so what we basically saw was that it's an inside job. The police are policing the police, right? And so where's the accountability, to your point about having an external entity to review these things, right?
Man, listen, if we had the authority to make the determination on who's going to review us, we would do the same thing, right? It's human nature to want to protect your interests. What has to happen is the right people have to get together and make a passionate decision to do otherwise. It's almost impossible to evaluate yourself objectively. As a matter of fact, I would go out and say it's impossible. If you don't have a review board that has subpoena power, then you are not really evaluating your activity adequately. It's just impossible. Mm-hmm. You may think that you are, and that's okay. But, I listen to the community, and I hear what people say. We have a team of community advisors who give us feedback on the assessment of people's perceptions of the system, and people have some concerns, man. And hopefully this movement, this local movement, and this national movement will push us in that direction of developing review boards with subpoena power.
Right. Because this is a local issue. All politics is local, but it's also this is a national issue. But also, as you mentioned, folks in Belgium, in Paris, in Africa are talking about this. This is a global issue to reform this lawless, reckless culture of policing in our world. Last thing, I'll let you go. Talking to Dr. Howard Henderson about database police reform. You and your team have reviewed policy recommendations. You've reviewed legislation on the left and on the right. Can you tell us, as we are in this hyper partisan environment, as you mentioned, folks don't want to come together and find where they agree, and they're just going to use that as an excuse not to get stuff done and keep kicking the can down the road. What have you seen in terms of where do you think both sides agree from what you see? What is it clear to you that folks?
I think that they agree that chokeholds are inappropriate.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. I think we all agree.
Yeah, we agree on that.
Hold that point. Folks, thank you for watching. In the comments, do you think chokeholds should be banned? Tell us in the comments. Should chokeholds be banned? Yes or no? All right, Doc.
I think they agree on that. But I think they disagree in the approach that should be taken to deal with it. On one side, you see people who vehemently want to hold officers accountable. On the other side, you see more of a laissez-faire, hands-off approach to dealing with police use of chokeholds. But I think that beyond that point, you're going to be splitting hairs, because to not have legitimate police reform legislation should just simply be unacceptable. Because the crazy part about all of this, Damien, is that what the Black community is saying, and now what 70% of Americans are saying, is we want the Constitution to be applied to Black folks too.
Yeah.
Right. That's the elephant in the room.
Dr. King said, "Be true to what you said on paper."
You know, and so, man, I think that if we don't understand that context, that this is a human rights issue, you got to take see, the criminal justice system was designed to control poor and minority people. And so you can't expect the criminal justice system to apply human rights to you at all. This has got to be taken out of this context. You got to have people who understand social justice and the need for reparations. We got to have a conversation about reparations, and all of this needs to be a part of this. And so this needs to be a continuous conversation that we don't allow to be diluted because people have a political ideology that they refuse to admit. Listen, man, I can go talk to a group of Black police officers, and they will tell me that they experience discrimination in the job. They see discrimination in the activity. 84% of police officers in this country admit to seeing misconduct expressed by other officers.
Yeah.
I mean, come on. I mean, so the other elephant in the room, and we're running out of rooms here, is that out of all of these concerns that we have and all these observations that we all of a sudden now want to openly admit, the police culture is really what we're dealing with. And no matter how many ways you want to split it, if you don't address the entire culture of policing, then you excrement in the wind.
Yeah. Quick question from the audience, Doc.
Go ahead.
Can we use hiring and training models that the state and federal law enforcement use? Because I think
absolutely, and I don't see. Yeah, I get it. I think what they're saying is that the state and the federal government have a standard for hiring practices. Okay, and you're not going to get hired if you don't have at least a college degree at the state level, the federal level for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a certain level of training expectation that you must be able to meet. For some reason, at the local level, we provide a lot of excuses for lowering those standards, even as low as a high school diploma. And I think that should be unacceptable. But I think it can be adopted. We just got to get policymakers to understand that we can nationalize standards for police hiring practices.
Yeah, yeah. Another question here. And thank you all for the questions and the comments. It's been great. Doc, how do you measure success as it relates to your advocacy and your work at the Center for Justice Research?
Man, listen, it's real simple. Number one, have we seen a reduction in police use of force? Are fewer people being arrested unnecessarily? 80% of arrests are focused on misdemeanor. That's ridiculous because these are low-level nonviolent crimes. And so we look at a reduction in police use of force. We look at a reduction in unnecessary arrests. We look at overall quality of life. But we also look at public perception and how individuals feel they're being received by the police department. We look at a bunch of different measures, but we're focused on outcomes, man, and identifying those outcomes over time.
A couple more questions. How do you retrain the thought process and the business as usual of how policing was initially designed to manage African Americans? How do you retrain that thought process?
Well, I'll tell you what, if you start holding them more accountable in terms of filing criminal charges on them, affecting them financially, individually, where the city or the county doesn't pay, that's a start. Mm-hmm. They have to be held responsible for their behavior. We can no longer say that qualified immunity is the solution to this. And I talked about this when we first started this conversation. There should be certain behaviors that are not protected by qualified immunity. And I think we're talking about those issues as we move forward in this discussion. But I think you can hold them accountable. Sometimes that accountability looks like jail time and losing your job.
Yeah. Doc, one more question. Sure, psych evaluations. What is the role, or how important are psychological evaluations? What can they play into reforming this system in terms of catching the bad actors beforehand or catching them in the act? How powerful can they be?
So the psych evaluations are very powerful, but we got to use the right evaluations that can identify the behaviors that are more likely to be involved in mistreatment of individuals in the community. Now, but I'm going to say this though, in some European countries, officers train for 3 years. And if you look at the amount of training time, 3 years.
Wow.
If you look at the amount of training that we put our officers through, we're essentially putting them out there, a lot of them unprepared to deal with the realities that they're going to face. One of the officers in the Minneapolis case had only been on the job, I think, 4 days.
2 of them had only been on the job 4 days. 2 of them.
And when that officer said he saw the individual doing what he did, he didn't know how to deal with it. We got to get away from that. But the bigger issue in this room, and we can shoot this around as long as we want to shoot it. We can debate about which way the cow eats the cabbage. Racism is pervasive in our criminal justice system. Mm-hmm. And until we address the racism in the room, until all men are treated equal, we're going to have these problems. And we have to be, zero tolerance in dealing with that issue.
Yeah. One last question. I'll let you go. I know I keep saying this, Doc, but I appreciate you.
Oh man, you're good, man. We got time.
How can anti-racist implementations mediate this issue within police force? And we're talking about those groups who come in and do the trainings and anti-racist kind of conversations. How can that help?
Man, listen, I think that, for one, you have to be able to say that you've exposed people to this reality. Now, being a member of a minority group, we often think that people think all day and they think about us all the time. The black reality is absent from a lot of people's thought process on a day-to-day basis. But I think that the first step is to provide training to some of these folks who can be trained. Everybody can't be trained. But I think implicit bias, regardless of the criticism that is received, there's some people, if you autocorrect and redirect their behavior and the thought process, they will change. But there's that small group that won't change no matter what. But at least at that point, you could say, I've provided you the training you need. And guess what? You're not fit for the job and it's time to go.
Yeah. Damien Jones podcast, talking with the leading voice. And I'm not just saying this because he's sitting in front of me, but the leading voice on this issue of data-based, evidence-based police reform. Folks, let me remind you, early voting in the state of Texas is happening right now. And so one part of doing our part to get the right leaders in office is making sure we go out and vote. That's one part, not the end all be all, but that's one part. So make sure you go to mytexasvotes.com to find your early voting location. Also, on Wednesday's show, we will have Texas Democratic Party State Chair Gilberto Hinojosa right here on the Damien Jones podcast at 12:30 to talk about politics and much more. So make sure you mark your calendars for that broadcast as well. We're really going to ask him some great questions and get some great information from him. Doc, as we let you go, just kind of tell folks where they can reach you, how they can get in contact with you, and learn more about your work at the Center for Justice Research.
Yeah, man. Look, our website, centerforjusticeresearch.org. You go to the website, we have all the social media outlets, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube. You can find the links there. But we're getting ready to put out a community survey, man, so we can figure out what the community thinks about some of these justice issues. We have a lot of national initiatives that we're part of and people that we partner with around the country, because it's going to take everyone, particularly those individuals who share lived experiences, because as you see, given the political climate, if we don't fight for equality and express to the justice system, it's just not going to happen. And so that's what we're here for, man. We use our research as advocacy, and we try to arm people with facts because we think facts will save the day.
Yeah. And just for all the people watching, well, let me say this first. But folks, if you appreciated the information given by this great brother, Dr. Henderson, just say thank you, Dr. Henderson, in the comments. Let him know that you appreciate the information, or just give us a like, or give us a heart, or what have you. But Doc, just in 1 minute, just give the folks watching just some final words as it relates to reforming this racist and lawless police system.
Again, unless you're willing to deal with selection or hiring, training, leadership, organizational culture, transparency, and accountability, we're wasting time, because you cannot just deal with one issue by itself. And we got to make sure that we have the facts, that we don't allow people to manipulate us with misinformation and emotion. And we got to hold people accountable. If we hold people accountable and we stay the course, I think we'll be going in the right direction.
Absolutely. Dr. Howard Henderson, director from the Center for Justice Research at Texas Southern University. Thank you so much for joining us. And I'm sure you'll come back on to talk with us any other time. But folks, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate your support. Hope this conversation helps you around the dinner table, at the barbershops, at the salons, as you're wearing your mask and social distancing, and when you're voting, when you're talking with your children and having that talk, when you're talking with family, when you're in your group meetings and group text messaging and so forth and so on. Make sure you are using the right information. Make sure your conversations are data-based, and we have to channel that emotion as we turn these emotional debates into real progressive reforms that work for all people. And so really appreciate you all. And as always, until next time, continue to live your life with intensity, integrity, and intelligence. This is the Damien Jones podcast. Go Texas Southern University Tigers.